Hello guys, and welcome to another simple beginner web development project tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to create a responsive pop-up or modal using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Okay, so on this page we have this button asking us to subscribe. We can click it and then this modal pops up and we have this smooth animation with it. Okay, you can see it doesn't just appear, it fades in. So we are going to use CSS Animations to do that. We can click this X button to close the modal, or we can click anywhere outside the card to close the modal. Alright, so they are asking us to subscribe, so we can enter our email and then subscribe. And you see we get this thank you message that disappears in 3 seconds. Alright, so as I said, this is actually going to be responsive. It's going to be responsive on smaller screens. So here in my project folder, I have my image and I'm going to leave a link for that. I have my index.html file, my index.js file, and then my style sheet, my style.css file. So I'm going to open the project folder in VS Code. And I have, for plugins, I have Emmet and Live Server, okay? So you can install that if you don't have that. So with Emmet, I'm going to do exclamation tab. Alright, and I'm going to link my style sheet. And also I'm going to use icon scout, okay, for this X icon. Alright, I'm going to use icon scout for that. So I'm going to grab the CDN and I'm going to leave a link for the icon scout CDN as well. So I'm going to open that with live server. Alright, so for the HTML, let's first create the button that says subscribe. Let's have a div with a class of modal, and then inside it we are going to have the card, okay? And the card is first going to have the X or close icon. So let me go to icon scout. Close, and this is the icon I'm going to use. And I'm going to have the image, which is going to be in a div with a class of brand. And then we are going to have our info or content. All right, so we are going to have an h2 and a paragraph. Let's do lorem 20. All right, and now we are going to have the form. Okay, so with the form we are going to have our inputs. The first is going to be our email. The next is going to be a submit. The value is going to say subscribe. And that's all for the HTML. All right, so we have this. Let me link my script, which is going to be index.js. All right, so we are done with the markup. Okay, we are done with the HTML. Now let's go on to the CSS. All right, so for the CSS, I'm first going to zero out the margin and the padding. I'm going to set the border to none, and then the box size is going to be border box. All right, let's go to the body. I'm going to give it a width of 100, viewport width, a height of 100 viewport height. I'm going to give it a background of F24438. I'm going to display grid so that I can easily center everything. I'm going to place items to the center. I'm going to change the font family to Poppins, which is a sans serif font. And then I'm going to change the font weight as well to 300 and the line height to 1.5. Okay. Now let's style the button. Okay, this button, let's style it. I'm going to give it a pattern, 1 rem top and bottom, and then 3 rem left and right. Okay, I'm going to change the font size to 1 rem as well. Then I'm going to transition all 300 milliseconds is, and that is because I'm going to have a hover effect, okay, with the button. I'm going to give the button a hover effect. Okay, so I'm going to change the opacity to 0.9 on hover, and I want the cursor to be pointer as well. All right, now let's go to the modal. We give it a class of modal. All right, so we are done with the button. Now let's style the modal, okay, which is this. So the modal is going to have a width of 100% and a height of 100% as well. I'm going to position it fixed, and I'm going to display grid so that I can center the card easily with place items. Let me give it a background. Let me make it a little darker with RGBA 00, so black with some transparency. Now let's move on to the card. Okay, so the modal card. Okay, so it's going to have a background. Let's make it white. Let me give it a width of 50 rem. Let me display flex, align items to the center. Gap, I'm going to give it a gap of 2 rem so that we have some space, and I'm going to give it some padding. Okay, padding of 2 rem, and I'm going to position it. We are going to position that absolute, okay, inside the card. So that is why we give this a position of relative. Let's actually give the close icon an ID, okay, of close. All right, so modal card and then close. Let's position that absolute, and then from the top we are going to do 2 rems. It's going to be 2 rems from the top, and then from the right 2 rems as well. I'm going to change the font size for the brand which has the image. I'm going to do a width of 30 rem. I'm going to display block on the image, and then give it a width of 100%. Now let me go on to the H2. Actually it's A2. Margin bottom of 2 rem. For the form, I'm going to give it a margin top, okay, margin top of 2 rems. So this is the form. Let me give it 100% width, and I'm going to display flex, okay, justify content to be space between. Let me style the email input. I'm going to give it a background of EEE, which is light gray, a width of 100%. Let me give it a pattern of 1 rem all around. Let me remove that outline. Let me say none. Okay, the outline is this black border or outline that we have. I'm going to say none, and now we don't have it. All right, now let me move on to the subscribe button. And that is going to have a background of F2. This I'm going to give it a color of white, and I'm going to give it a pattern of 0 top and bottom, and then 1.6 left and right. So now we are actually done with this. Okay, we're actually done with the styling, and we want to make it responsive. Okay, so on mobile, you see it doesn't really look good. Okay, so we are going to take care of that with media queries. Okay, with CSS Media Queries. I want to have a different style for card. I'm going to change the flex direction, okay, for the card to column. Okay, so this is the breakpoint. I'm going to change the width of the card to 80 viewport width. Let me text align to the center. The card brand, which is the div containing the image, I'm going to give it a width of 15 rems and a height of 15 rems as well. I'm going to change the border radius to 50%, and I'm going to set the overflow to hidden, and then I'm going to set a margin top of 4 rems. All right, so that we have some space. Now let's move on to the form. Okay, model card and then form. I'm going to display block. Now inside the email input, I want everything to be centered. Okay, placeholder, that is going to be centered as well. So text align is going to be centered. Okay, center, text align, email. I spelled that wrong. And now everything we enter is going to be centered. The placeholder is centered as well. All right, let's style the subscribe button. Is going to copy this and change this to submit. Give it a width of 100%, pattern of 1 rem top and bottom, and 0 left and right. Let me give it a margin top of 0.6 rem. All right, so that is all for the media queries. Okay, and you can see now it looks good on smaller screens. It looks good on mobile. Okay, so that is our responsive design for the card, for the modal. Now let's move on to the JavaScript, okay, where we can close and open the modal. So we have this button, okay, this subscribe button, which appears first. So for the initial screen, we are going to display none for the modal. So let's do that. Let's display none for the modal. So for the start, we are only going to have this button. All right. So let's get that. So const, I'm going to name this open btn document dot query selector and the tag of button. Okay. And we are going to have that close icon or close button on the card, which is this. Okay, we give it an ID of close. Let's get that to, I'm going to name that close btn, and that is going to be document.query selector ID of close. Okay, now let's get the modal itself. Modal. So we are going to add an event. Okay, a click event on the button. Open btn dot add event listener. There's going to be a click event. So on click, we want to call a function called open modal. Okay, and that is going to open the modal. So we are going to get the modal, and we are going to change the style, the display. We are going to change it from none to grid. Okay, so when this button is clicked, the modal should be displayed grid. Okay, which is the initial display we gave it. All right, so that is all for opening the modal. So close btn dot add event listener. On click, I want to close modal. Okay, that is going to be a function. Close modal, and it's going to be the same thing here, but we are going to change the display to none. Okay, all right, so let's open the modal. We open it and we can click this to close it. Okay, so we have that functionality. Now for the finished project, you can see we can click outside of the card to close it. Okay, so let's add that functionality to this. So what we are going to do is add an event listener to the modal. I'm going to add an event listener to the modal, and it's going to be a click event. So I'm going to say if the event target has a class or the class list contains modal, then I want to close it. So what I'm going to do is call the close modal function. All right, so let's try that. Okay, so we can click outside the card to close it. Notice how anywhere I click in the card, I can't close it, but when I click the S, it closes, and when I click outside the modal too, it closes. Okay, so for the animations, I'm going to go to the CSS. Okay, so for the animations at keyframes, this is going to be for opening the modal. Okay, so for opening the modal, I'm going to have the opacity start from 0, and then it's going to go to an opacity of 1. Okay, and that's going to give us that fading effect. And I'm going to add this animation to the modal. So let's go to modal and add that animation here. So animation, open modal. I'm going to do 1 second, ease and I'm going to say forwards. Okay, so you see we have that fading effect. Okay, when opening the model, we have that fading animation effect. All right, and you can see it doesn't do it for the closing. Okay, it doesn't do it for closing the model, and that is because we have to set a different or a separate keyframes for opening the model. That's keyframes, close model, and that is going to go from 1 opacity of 1 to an opacity of 0. So what we are going to do is create a class for the animation so that whenever we are closing it, we can add that class to the model. All right, so that we have that fading effect for the close as well. So I'm going to call this class, and I'm going to set the animation. We named it close model, and we are going to do 1 second as well. Easy. Let me actually do linear and then forwards. Okay, let me make this linear as well. So we want to add that fading effect for 1 second before we display none. So model, I'm going to add a class, and we called it close model animation. Okay, which is this class. All right, so we want to do this, and then after 1 second, okay, so I'm going to do set timeout, and that is going to be 1000 milliseconds. So after that 1000 milliseconds, I want to display none. Okay, so this is what I want to display none. All right, and now you can see we have that fading effect. Okay, and you see how when we click the subscribe button again, it doesn't work, and that is because this close model animation class doesn't get removed. Okay, so what we are going to do is whenever we call the close model function, we want to reload the page. Okay, so we are going to say window dot location. You see the page reloads. Okay, and now everything works fine. All right, so that is done. Now the last thing we are going to do is the thank you message that comes when we subscribe. Okay, you see with the finished project, we have that thank you message that comes when we subscribe. Okay, and disappears in 3 seconds. So that is what we are going to do. So for that, I'm going to create a separate function. Let me actually get the form. Okay, so const form is going to be document.query selector form. Okay, and we are going to add a submit event on the form, and we are going to call this function submit form. Okay, so let's create that function submit form. I want to get the card, and that is document dot query selector. We give it an ID, we give it a class of card, and when we submit the form, I want to change the inner HTML of the card. So inner HTML, and I'm going to grab this real quick. So the inner HTML is going to be okay. So that is what we are going to have. And I'm going to set timeout for this as well. Okay. And that is going to be 3 seconds, which is 3000 milliseconds. And after that 3000 milliseconds, so let me quickly show you. So we enter email. You see, when I click this submit, it shows, but it never goes away. Okay, let me actually make this an H1 so that it's a little bigger. Let me try that again. So we have our message, but it never goes away. Okay, but what I want to do is close the modal. I want to close the modal in 3 seconds. So I'm just going to call the close modal function. Okay, after 3 seconds. That is the set timeout. Okay, so after 3 seconds of showing this thank you message, I want to close the modal. All right, so let's try that again. We subscribe, and after 3 seconds this is going to fade away. All right, so that is all for the project. So we can open our model, and the fading is a little slower, so I'm going to change the values. Let's make this 500 milliseconds. Change this to 500 milliseconds as well. And the modal opening is going to be 500 milliseconds as well. Alright. And it's responsive as well. So let's try that on mobile. We subscribe and we get that thank you message. Okay. We can close anywhere we click outside of the card, or we can click the close icon to close it. All right, so that is all for this modal or pop-up card project using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can check out my channel for more HTML, CSS, and JavaScript tutorials just like this. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.